This is Professor Hall, and this is our last of 4 videos about transitions. Today, what we're going to do is talk about using signpost words, phrases, and sentences kind of all together. In our first video, we just looked at those signal words, transition linking words, or sometimes called signposts. The second video, we looked at what transitional sentences looked like. The third video, we talked a little bit about how to use transitional sentences, how to write them. And now we're going to look at how to use all 3 of these techniques. So, to recap, different types of transitions. Some transitions are single words, which act as signposts for the readers. They could include chronology words, that's showing time, things like first and before, after, second, next, then. Or they could be words that connect ideas in different ways. There's a lot of different categories. So showing differences like however, therefore is a conclusion word. Furthermore is adding a point or kind of expanding upon a point. There's a lot of different categories. Other transitional words and phrases connect sentences inside a paragraph. Martha likes to shop online. In contrast, her sister only shops in a store. And then there are transitions. Other transitions are sentences that help organize thoughts or connect ideas from one paragraph to the next. They can also help connect the idea in a paragraph back up to the introduction and the thesis statement. And these are called external transitions. All of these transitions help with coherence and cohesion. We talked about those concepts before. Coherence means that your ideas are in a logical order, and cohesion means that your ideas stick together, that everything connects to make it one beautiful essay. So let's take a look at a thesis statement and a couple paragraphs with no connection. And then what we're going to do is edit this a few times for different types of transitions. So the thesis is, vaping is just as harmful as smoking cigarettes. E-cigarettes heat nicotine, flavoring, and other chemicals to create an aerosol that you inhale. Regular tobacco cigarettes contain 7,000 chemicals, many of which are toxic. We don't know exactly what chemicals are in e-cigarettes. Blaha says, quote, "There's almost no doubt that they expose you to fewer toxic chemicals than traditional cigarettes." There has been an outbreak of lung injuries and deaths associated with vaping. As of January 22nd, 2020, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention confirmed 60 deaths in patients with e-cigarette or vaping product use associated lung injury, which is called EVALI. Blaha explains, that's a real name, I did not make that up. Blaha explains, quote, "These cases appear to predominantly affect people who modify their vaping devices or use black market modified e-liquids. This is especially true for vaping products containing THC. That's the chemical in marijuana." So here's the problem with these 2 paragraphs. Number 1, the first paragraph really almost seems to go against the thesis. The thesis is that it's just as harmful as smoking cigarettes, but then we have this quote about fewer toxic chemicals. So my thought as a reader would be, well, if I'm being exposed to fewer toxic chemicals, then how is it just as harmful as smoking cigarettes? That doesn't make logical sense. Then we have the idea of the outbreak of lung injuries. Now, this does connect to the thesis about vaping being harmful, but it does not connect. I'm going to put kind of like an X here over a possible arrow. There we go. It doesn't really connect to the paragraph above it. So it's quite disjointed. And honestly, looking at this, it might even seem like this, It might even seem like this second paragraph came a lot later in the essay and not necessarily right after the first paragraph. So the first step to fixing this is to just add some signpost words. These are just our transitional words one at a time. So 7,000 chemicals, many of which are toxic. While we don't know exactly what chemicals are in e-cigarettes, Blaha says there's no doubt that they expose you to fewer toxic chemicals. Okay, so we just have that one word, but it does help to connect the idea of not knowing what chemicals are in, but also being exposed to fewer of them. Nevertheless, there has been an outbreak of lung injuries. Moreover, he explains these cases appear to be predominantly affect people who modify their vaping devices. Okay. This time I do mean to erase. So here's the key word here. Moreover does help to introduce this quotation. But the real key word is nevertheless. Because now there's a better connection between being exposed to fewer toxic chemicals. However, nevertheless, there has been an outbreak of lung injuries and deaths. So it's a very small word, but it does what a transition is meant to do. It connects your ideas, and it makes a very logical connection. Even though there are less toxic chemicals in e-cigarettes, there have still been an outbreak of lung injuries and deaths. So the word nevertheless, I think, is right here the most powerful word in these two paragraphs, possibly besides the word death, because it's helping to logically connect the ideas. So that's the first step. That's our first revision. We're going to revise this again. And step 2, we're going to add some phrases. So, e-cigarettes heat nicotine flavorings and other chemicals to create an aerosol that you inhale. They were created as an alternative to regular tobacco cigarettes, which contain 7,000 chemicals. Many are toxic. These things here in blue, there we go. These things here in blue help to explain what e-cigarettes are and how they're a little bit different from regular cigarettes. So I would expect, if this is the first paragraph of an essay, that you would possibly see later on in the essay a paragraph a little bit more about this background. How else are they different from regular tobacco cigarettes, or how did people think they were going to be different? And then how else are they creating problems, right? But that phrase, they were created as an alternative, really helps clarify things. So, nevertheless, e-cigarettes are still dangerous, and there has been an outbreak of lung injuries and death. So, again, we had the word nevertheless to connect to the idea about having fewer toxic chemicals. And now we explain that a little bit more. Even though they have fewer toxic chemicals, they're still dangerous. And again, this points a lot more clearly to the thesis that it's just as harmful as cigarettes. So now we've added a few additional phrases. Things are starting to come together, and let's connect our ideas fully. Step 3, adding full transitional sentences. E-cigarettes heat nicotine flavorings and other chemicals. They were created as an alternative to regular tobacco cigarettes, which contain 7,000 chemicals, many of which are still toxic. While we don't know what chemicals are in the e-cigarettes, Blaha says that there are fewer toxic chemicals than traditional cigarettes. Exposure to fewer chemicals does not mean that vaping is safe. In fact, e-cigarettes are still dangerous and can be just as harmful as regular smoking. Research shows that there has been an outbreak of lung injuries. Okay, now this is quite a bit better, because this person has added kind of a concluding sentence to this paragraph that much better points back to the thesis that e-cigarettes or vaping is harmful. So the quote seems to contradict the thesis. Well, there's fewer toxic chemicals than regular cigarettes. This person is saying, no, just because there's fewer chemicals doesn't mean that it's safe. That's a direct link. It's a direct transitional link back to the thesis that vaping is just as dangerous as cigarettes. Then we have, instead of nevertheless, in fact, which connects to the exposure to fewer chemicals doesn't mean that they're safe, right? So it wouldn't have made sense to keep nevertheless, because it's not a comparison to the idea of not being safe. Instead, we're proving the point that we just made. Exposure to fewer chemicals does not mean vaping is safe. In fact, e-cigarettes are still dangerous, and so now we have an addition, can be just as harmful as regular smoking. Then we have this phrase, research shows that there has been an outbreak. We showed the research before, but we didn't use this word. And in your reader's mind, this is going to be a key word because you're proving a point. That's what you need the transition for. So to prove your point, you're giving research, and it also helps to smooth the transition, smooth it out from what you have to say to your pieces of research. So this is especially true for vaping products containing THC. However, this is not always the case. For example, a young 15-year-old girl died of EVALI after vaping for only a month. Now, this is from a true story from the New York Times that one of my students had included in their paper. This is not the student's paper, just for the sake of their privacy, but it was sort of similar to this. So now we have the word however, comparison word, and then we're transitioning into our next paragraph with a longer example. I have this in here because I think a lot of times people have very long paragraphs. They don't always know how to break it up. They don't always know when to transition. Here we have just had an opening statement in this first paragraph, a little bit of explanation, a piece of research, and then a concluding statement. Then we have another topic sentence. We introduce our research, we give our research, and now we're going to transition into kind of the same idea, but a little bit more detail with an example. So even though I'm still showing that it's harmful and I'm still talking about lung injuries and death, I'm kind of moving to a new point here. So it's not always the case that people are using black market or modified e-liquids. It's not always the case that these liquids have to contain THC, for example, and then I'm going to go into that, or the writer rather is going to go into that example more fully. So I hope that you can kind of see here the yellow signpost words, the red I'm going to erase just for our sake. Sorry. The yellow signpost words, the short phrases that we did in the blue, and then the longer sentences in the pink. Using all of those together helps to fully connect the ideas in these paragraphs. It makes it a much more cohesive essay so that our ideas stick together. The ideas are linked. And they all point back to proving the thesis that this is something that's harmful, which is what our writer is trying to prove. And they help a little bit with organization to just kind of keep on track with our thoughts, and the reader is able to follow it better. So things to remember. You can use signpost words, phrases, or full sentences by themselves. But really the best way to connect ideas, sentences, and paragraphs is to use a combination of these tools. Transitions help the writer stay on track and help the reader follow the writer's ideas. Transitions help make your essay better organized, coherence, and they help make the parts of your essay logically connect, which is cohesion. So think about the categories when you're choosing them as well. Think about which ones you need and whether you can just use one word or whether maybe you need to better connect your ideas with a full sentence or maybe even two, one at the end of one paragraph, one at the beginning of another. And that is it for transitions. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments, and I look forward to seeing your work. Thanks. Have a great day.